and welcome to the Football Hipsters podcast interviews. My name is Kris, your host as usual, and tonight I am joined by a fellow panellist. We're going as a double act here. I am joined this evening by Drew. Good evening to you, Drew.
Good evening, Kris. How are you doing?
All good, my friend. All good, my friend. And thanks to your hard work, we have a fantastic guest this evening. So without further ado, it is my pleasure to welcome a journalist, a coach, a United States women's national team player, and current midfielder for FC Kansas City, or should say Kansas City Women's Soccer Club to give them their full name. It's Yael Averbuch, and hopefully I've pronounced that correctly. So thank you very much for joining us, Yael.
Oh, my pleasure. That was very good pronunciation. I'm impressed.
I might have done a bit of research just to double check. I might have, but don't tell anyone. Thank you so much for giving us your time this evening. We have a series of questions. Drew and myself are just going to kind of piggyback and free flow as we go. So I'm going to hand over to Drew first of all. So Drew, question number one, fire away, my good man.
Sure. Again, it's lovely to meet you, Yael. I guess we can just dive right into it. I guess tell us a little bit about you and your life in the sport, your past in it, your present, and where you see yourself moving forward as well.
Yeah, so I started playing back when I was 7, and my parents, like a lot of parents in the U.S., didn't know anything about soccer, as we call it. And so it was a learning process with my family as I went, and then now I consider us, a soccer family. My younger sister plays. And my family are all huge fans of the game now as we all learn together. But yeah, I grew up playing in northern New Jersey, which was great because there was a ton of diversity in the area and still is. So it was a really good place to learn the game. I was coached by people from really all over the world, coaches from England, Turkey, Peru. I mean, you name the country, there was someone around in North Jersey from there teaching the game and playing the game in a different way. So I felt very fortunate to have started my soccer journey there. Went on to play college soccer at the University of North Carolina for 4 years. And following that, I've played professionally now. I'm about to go into my 8th season. So, I've played for 3 years in the WPS, Women's Professional League in the U.S. that unfortunately folded. Following that, I played in Russia for a month, interesting experience there, then in Sweden for a year and a half, and then I've been back playing in the U.S. For the last 2 seasons, and then we'll be rejoining FC Kansas City. So that covers kind of up until the present. For me, I'm 29 now, so some may say, I'm getting to be an older, more veteran player, but I actually feel still mentally and physically really, right in the heart of my career in terms of I still think I can get a lot better as a player. I feel like I'm still improving in leaps and bounds. So for me, I feel like I'm somewhere in the middle of my journey and still have, a lot more to give and a lot more to learn in the sport.
Yeah, I want to ask you a little bit about. I'm going to call it soccer for the purposes of this interview because you are our guest, so we shall use your sort of familiar language. So yourself, sort of growing up, it's not. I think it's fair to say not a primary sport in the US. It's kind of one of the lesser sports, so to speak. That is changing, which we'll come on to. But how did you find it growing up in a sort of a country where it wasn't necessarily the first sport, and were you ever guided into maybe looking at the more popular sports when you became an athlete?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think I was pretty fortunate because I, like I said, grew up in an area with people from all around the world. So I wasn't really, in an area where it was as traditional as maybe some other parts of the United States where, it's all about baseball, basketball, American football. So I think, and also during a time frame when soccer was becoming more mainstream and more popular in the US, which it's continued to do. So I never felt like I was playing a sport that was maybe strange or a little, out there. The only reason I maybe felt like that was because my parents really had no concept of what soccer was all about. It was like something kind of weird when they were growing up. You didn't really play soccer. No one did that. So they didn't really know much about the sport. So that was really the only sense I got as a young player, that maybe it was a little bit of something newer or different in the country. But otherwise, I think because of the area of the country I grew up in and the time frame, I really, soccer was the thing to do. I started playing because my best friend in school was playing, and everyone I knew played soccer. So it wasn't so weird at all.
Super. Drew wants to ask you a little bit about your experiences with the US Women's National Team, and indeed the most recent World Cup. What would you like to go with, Drew?
Well, I mean, I know I can speak from experience. When the World Cup was here in 1999, I actually had the privilege to go watch the U.S. Denmark match in the Netherlands, and when that stadium it's massive, when it was sold out, and you saw the effect that it had on the fans of the sport, and you saw how much it was how it continued to grow, and then it won the World Cup that year. In relation to that, do you feel that the U.S. winning the 2015 World Cup, do you think it will continue to sort of have a big effect on women's soccer in the country, or do you feel like maybe it reverted back to where the 2015 win had to sort of almost start from scratch again? What are your views on that?
Yeah, no, I definitely think we're making huge progress in a lot of ways. I was actually at that game at the Meadowlands in '99, which is funny to think back on. But I think certainly this was a really important World Cup for women's soccer in general and for the U.S. I think we continue to see more parity in the sport, and countries around the world that maybe have a really strong culture in the men's game starting to invest financially and in terms of programming on the women's side. So we're really seeing, the US started out, and I would say in '99, in terms of funding and the number of girls participating, we were way ahead of most other places in the world. So that was great. When we won the World Cup in '99, that was kind of like bringing soccer to the forefront. Everybody realized in the US, for women's soccer, we're the country to beat. And I think that was the case for a long time. But, we hadn't won another World Cup since then until this past summer. So I think a lot was going on in terms of obviously the game is growing enormously in our country, but also all around the world. And I think the feeling, for any of the real diehard soccer fans who follow the international game on the women's side, there's some concern that, are we getting caught up to, or maybe even passed by in some of the countries like, if you look at it, France is one country that's kind of on the rise. Brazil's always been a contender. Germany's always very strong. And so there are a number of countries that are now, legitimate challengers to win a World Cup. And the fact that we showed that we are still dominant, and not just dominant in terms of winning the tournament, but I mean to win the final by that margin and to show that kind of performance, I think made a really big statement that's important to the growth of soccer in our country, because we do have to match the level of improvement of countries around the world who are very rapidly improving and starting to close that gap for sure. But it's also nice. It's nice to know that what we're doing in some sense is absolutely right. We just have to continue to make changes and stay on top of the progress like the rest of the world. And also, it's very important for our current women's professional league, the NWSL, to increase fan support and continue to create that league as a strong pool of players to support the national team.
I'm going to just hijack Drew very quickly because I want to ask you something. Do you are you sort of old enough to remember USA '94? Because I'm going to sound really old now, but it was the first World Cup that I remember. I'm 33 myself, and I do remember Italia '90, but I wasn't quite into it. But I do very much remember Diana Ross and all that, the hideous United States kit that they had that year. But more importantly, it was the first. It seemed like the first step that FIFA was recognising the US as a country that could put on these events. Do you have any memories of that at all?
Yeah, what's funny? In '94, I was actually in England with my family during the World Cup. And I remember we knew nothing about the sport. We didn't even know what was going on in the US at the time. And obviously, everyone in England and the people we were staying with were, tuned into the World Cup and were watching it all the time. And we kind of thought it was so bizarre. Like, what is this sport? What are they watching? And why is this interesting? If you don't understand the game and you're just watching people run around on the screen, it's hard to understand why people are so drawn to it. So I remember that was kind of my first exposure to soccer, actually. Being aware that people were watching this big event, and we weren't even actually in the US at the time. So I remember it vaguely in that sense. And I do remember, as I started to play, I remember seeing highlights of the tournament and photographs and everything. So, but I would say, that was big for the US for the people who were involved in the soccer community. But being an outsider at that point, I kind of remember it being kind of like a strange thing going on.
Fantastic memories. I do recall it well. Staying up late at night, of course, as a teenager was always fun. Drew, let's pass back to you to have a chat about the current soccer in the US.
Well, sure. So, I mean, I was going to delve into, a little bit more about her playing experiences in Europe, and she actually, brought it up on her own. the German their women's league is actually very, very good. Same thing with the French league. I know that the Swedish league and the Swedish women's league is also very good. Pia Sundhage was the U.S. women's coach for a while, and she was one of the most decorated Swedish players, for the women's side of the game in their history. So I just wanted to go a little bit more into your experiences when you got to play in Europe. You said you were in Russia for a month. You said you played in Sweden as well. I'm assuming that you may have played other sides from other countries while you were there also. So I just wanted to talk a little bit more about your experiences there, maybe some highlights and things that you enjoyed the most, and how you think it compares to the U.S. League domestically. So.
Yeah, for me, it was really interesting playing in Europe, and a few of the teams I played for, actually, we were part of Champions League, or the Women's Champions League. So I did get to play teams from other countries. I was also in Sweden when the Women's Euros were taking place in Sweden, so I got to watch a lot of games as a spectator. So I felt like my time in Europe altogether, I was in Russia for a month, Sweden for a year and a half, and then I actually played in Cyprus for a month, which was a place I didn't even know where it was till I went there, actually. Beautiful, beautiful country. But my experience in Europe, including, actually, I forgot to mention, a 2-week, I guest played with the Arsenal ladies for 2 weeks in a tournament in Japan. So between all of those experiences, I did feel like I got a pretty good feel for, the differences in various countries, and also what it's like. When I played in Sweden, I was very impressed by the level of sophistication of the players. In the US, we play a very athletic style, and we have a lot of athletes who then become soccer players. And I think, in Europe, a lot of the times, everyone has a soccer mind. They watch the game, they know the game inside and out. And then from there, the best athletes and the ones who pick up the sport the best become the professional players. So I really enjoyed the approach to the game, the knowledge of the nuances that maybe don't exist everywhere around the world. And just the general level of tactical and technical proficiency of the players was a pleasure. I learned a ton from training and playing with my team in Gothenburg. And, we got to play against, we went to Serbia to play in Champions League for the first round, and we played against a French team. And when I played for the Russian team, we played against Potsdam in Germany. So I got a pretty decent feel of different leagues in Europe, and was always very, very impressed by the level of sophistication. I would say that's the main thing that stands out to me. Not that we don't have that in the US, but I think in the US, potentially where some players may lack in a little bit of the game understanding and sophistication, they make up for in the physical element. And I would say in Europe right now, it's kind of the opposite. Whereas there may not be as wonderful and surprisingly, phenomenal as of athletes as the U.S. There's definitely an understanding of some tactical nuances that maybe puts the players at that level of professionalism.
Well, I think it's interesting that you actually brought that up, because I always go back to the reference. In my experiences with coaching, a lot of the kids, sometimes you'll get a lot of kids who are very, very good athletes, but they have next to no understanding of the game, and then it's also the reverse. I always think about how Cobi Jones got into playing, how he was always so quick. And the coach at UCLA saw him sprinting, and he was like, I'm going to turn him into a soccer player. He actually had no interest in it before then. Then he ended up going to UCLA, playing there, and he actually ended up one of the most capped players in U.S. national men's team history. So I think it's just interesting how just athletics in the United States, it's all over the spectrum, and I thought it was interesting that you brought that up for sure. So
yeah, no, I think I think that also comes a little bit from the other sports that are very popular in the U.S. It's a lot easier to take a phenomenal athlete and make them an American football player. It doesn't quite translate the same way in soccer. I think we do have some wonderful athletes who are great players, don't get me wrong. But I think that's kind of the American mentality. If you're a really phenomenal, impressive athlete with a great body stature, then you're going to be good at whatever sport you choose. But, soccer has a lot more nuances. And part of the reason I love the game is because there's so many different body types and skill sets that can make you successful.
So to say, Cobi Jones, Coventry City legend, for those of our English. I remember him well with that, with the dreadlocks. And yes, I remember him well. Let's talk about, so as you said yourself, you're currently playing in the NWSL. How does it compare to your experiences when you were playing abroad? I mean, you sort of mentioned about how much you learned, particularly in Sweden. Do you feel that with the US, I mean, is the league itself is it sort of improving? Do you see, for example, since the World Cup in itself, has that changed a lot of things, and is that getting more and more younger athletes into the game from a female perspective?
Yeah, it's interesting in the US. I think that we already have a ton of young athletes involved in soccer. If you look at the numbers of young girls playing, I think it's astronomical. We have millions of young players playing the game. So I think in that sense, we're already very far um, in front of a lot of other countries. I think where we need to see the translation from that is in terms of those families and those players being fans of the game and supporters of clubs. And that's where in the US, I think it's a little bit different than in Europe. I think people in Europe are used to supporting soccer teams, and it's a lot more a part of the community. um, Whereas I would say it's hard. The US is a really big country, and to establish a new league, a lot of the teams in Europe that I played for or against around for a number of years. They're either affiliated with men's clubs or have been around and maybe were semi-professional, or the players would go to school and work on the side and play for the club. So the club had been there. Everyone knows about the club. In the US, basically 3 years ago when NWSL started, we founded all of these clubs from scratch for the most part. There are a few that are tied to MLS clubs on the men's side, which is great. But it's a kind of a different feel and a different look to the situation, because whereas we have a ton of young players interested in the game, it's been a struggle to get them out and actually come watch professional players. And I think absolutely the World Cup and the hype around that tournament and the US winning helped with that. We saw, in the welcome home games for the national team players, the stadiums were sold out. And obviously over time, as we get further from the tournament, that wore off a little bit. I think, there's still a lot of really good media attention on the league. But where we need to go next, I think, is that translation between all the youth players playing the game and involved for themselves, turning them into fans of the game and supporters of their local clubs. So that's kind of the step and the transition that we need to take as a country, in my opinion. But I think we're on the way. There's been progress, but there's still a lot of room to grow.
Well said, well said. And I have to ask you, as you might have guessed from the picture I posted on our account of you last evening, myself and Drew are both Arsenal fans here in the UK. In December, I believe it was December of 2014, you were invited as a guest to represent the famous Arsenal crest in Tokyo at the International Women's Club Championships. How did that go, and how much did you sort of learn or take in from the experience of mingling with a UK based team? And I was reading the article that you posted, and something that shone through was that you were really impressed at the level of professionalism that the club sort of put you in when you were part of their unit.
Yeah, absolutely. It was, I had a lot to take in during that time, because not only was I traveled over to London and met up with the team, so I already was, learning everyone's names, figuring out how it works there. And then immediately we left for Japan, which was also like a huge culture shock, a ton going on, so much information for me as a player and just as a person that I was taking in at the time. So I was kind of bombarded for 2 weeks with like so much quality learning experiences and things to, pick up on. I was very much impressed by the professionalism of the club, and the way in which the event and the travel was planned and how welcoming the team was. It was really an honor to take part in the tournament as a part of Arsenal Ladies. And I was also very impressed on the field with, again, the level of sophistication of the players, the quality of communication, the kinds of conversations that were going on, during break and play or at halftime among the players, was very impressive to me. I'm used to, in the US, we have a lot of good communication, and then at the end of the day, we look towards the coach most times to kind of fill in the blanks. And I think, whereas, the coach definitely was providing wonderful feedback for the Arsenal team, a lot of conversation was going on among the players, picking out tactical things and kind of coaching each other, self-coaching, in a way that I was kind of unfamiliar with in the US. And it was a very pleasant surprise for me to hear. So yeah, a ton of information, and it was really a pleasure I'm very impressed by the systems that are in place for women's soccer in Japan, from the youth level We did a little clinic for youth players all the way through. We played a college team actually in preparation for the tournament, and then we got to play against a Japanese team in the tournament. Just pure class, really quality, quality players, quality style of play. So altogether was a phenomenal experience. And I mean, there was no way I could possibly absorb all the things that were being thrown my way to come back with, but I tried my best.
So it's I know Kris can probably agree that a lot of the criticisms that Arsene Wenger gets, Arsenal's men's team manager, that he oftentimes lets the players sort out tactical issues on the pitch themselves without him getting up and barking and dictating orders from the sidelines. So it's actually interesting that you highlighted that you have that from the women's team as well. Well, the coach will say a few things here and there when necessary, but he trusts in the intelligence of his players, to get it done. And I think that when you highlight maybe the mental maturity of a lot of the players, despite no matter how old or young they are, I think that actually sheds a lot of light for for people who are trying to maybe understand the game a little bit more, or maybe people who might listen to this who are still playing and are younger. They can always sort of, when in doubt, if you learn things about the game and communicate with your teammates on that sort of level, that also that helps in any number of ways. And I think that's interesting that you brought that up. Quick, I guess Kris and I are just curious, quickly before we move on, we're curious, did they actually offer you to join Arsenal Ladies or no?
Yeah, so it was interesting. To be honest, the point of why I was going was at the time when I was asked to come as a guest player, I wasn't sure what my next move was going to be club-wise. So I was speaking with Arsenal and kind of trying to figure out if it made sense for me to go back to Europe. I was very hesitant because just for me, it's a major life upheaval, which I had done already a couple times, and I was kind of looking to stay in the U.S., but obviously it's of such a hugely respected club. I wasn't going to not entertain the possibility. So I was in talks with them, and they invited me to come as a guest player to kind of get to know the club a little more, meet the players, see if it was a good fit. And actually, during the time between when we had that talk and the tournament, which was obviously a while because we had to plan, me coming on as a guest player, I had to get the visa, all that stuff. I had decided to play for FC Kansas City during that time. And I went back to the coach at Arsenal and I said, listen, I've decided to stay in the US. Just for me right now, life-wise, it makes more sense. Do you still need me as a guest player or what? And he said, oh, no, you're more than welcome still. Please come with us as a guest player. So I really appreciated that. And I felt incredibly welcomed on and off the field. So it was kind of like a twofold situation. And it's still a place where, one day, it's definitely in the back of my mind always that one day maybe I would end up there. So it's not a closed door.
Awesome. I think that's great. Let me see. Okay, so moving along. So you've done quite a bit of coaching with youth, and we both, Kris and I, we've seen a lot of your the YouTube videos about technical training. So as you have your clinics as well. Can you talk to us a little bit about how you rate the standard of young U.S. players coming through the system, and maybe how you see the U.S. women's national team progressing as those players get older, from what you've seen?
Yeah, it's a very mixed scene in the US from what I've perceived. I think that there are some phenomenally talented players coming up through the youth system. That's no question at all. And I think the U.S. national team on the women's side, at least, will be in very good hands as those players mature and get to that point. It's not just about the couple star players. It's the general depth of the player pool is phenomenal. There are so many quality players that could play on that team. And even now, I would say, if for some reason the whole U.S. women's national team wasn't available, we could bring in another team that would compete and do very well on the world stage. So I think depth is one thing that we certainly have in our favor. I do think, though, as a country, there are some aspects I really focus when I'm coaching on the technical side of the game. That's what I'm passionate about. Those are the areas that have made me special as a player. So I don't really work on team tactics or much of that side of things. But I think technically, there are a lot of holes in our development as a country. I go to some places to hold a little one-day clinic, and I'll be pleasantly surprised at the players' technical ability, just in terms of basics of the game. And then I'll go somewhere else, and there's some massive holes. And it's not even that there are holes and the players, aren't capable. It's that they haven't even been exposed to some really basic technical skills. So to me, the more players that we can get to the point of technical proficiency, to have the basic tools of the game, just the basic striking of the ball in terms of quality passing, striking the ball with the laces, juggling, control, basic dribbling with both feet, being able to maneuver with the ball freely. I think the more players we have mastering those at a young age, and kind of if we could develop some standards with that, even though we have a huge country and it's hard to do, I think that's kind of the next step for for us as a country potentially.
Well, I mean, I couldn't agree more. I mean, in my experiences, both playing and coaching, the level of, as you said, technical proficiency and then understanding of the game, it varies based off of where you go in the United States, because the U.S. historically said, always had these pockets where a lot of excellent players come through. So you have like the Pacific Northwest, California, some states in the Midwest. You have New Jersey, North Carolina, but after that, it's a very, very mixed bag. So I think and because this country is so huge, you can't do something that, say, Belgium has recently done, where they've overhauled their entire youth production and focus on certain things, because you can easily do that when your population is only 8 million, and there's that many people in New York City. So tough task, but I guess strides are strides, and that's really all that matters. A little bit of progression here and there is what's important. Within your coaching experiences as well, you're it seems that you've always taken such an active role in trying to motivate people, with training ideas and trying to keep them on track with their own personal goals for themselves as a sport. Have you encountered any particular good or bad experiences with that?
Hey, I always have very positive feedback on a lot of the materials I put out there, and really what I aim to do is allow players to have the type of experiences that I had when I was a younger player, which was basically just I was shown a ton of ideas, and those ideas motivated and inspired me to go home and practice on my own and know that there was a next level I could get to, and then even another level after that. So really my aim is just in fun, interactive ways to share those ideas with players as well. Because a lot of players, they'll hear all the time, oh, you need to spend time with the ball. But they maybe aren't as fortunate to have ideas just thrown at them of what that means, things that are challenging that they can count and record, scores they can keep. So I would say I always, when I share those ideas, I get very positive feedback from parents, players themselves saying, "Oh, my daughter's been practicing this, whatever you showed her, for hours and hours. Thank you so much." Things like that all the time, and it really means a lot to me because that's my aim. It's not my time on the field with the player; it's what they take away from it and bring home, and will continue to practice over the weeks, months, even years for the future. And I always share with them too, I'll show you a few ideas, but be creative based on this, come up with your own. So I think, those experiences are incredibly positive for me, and just things as simple as, I put a lot of video content out there, and I'll get videos sent to me from players all around the world saying, "Oh, here, I tried your skill challenge," or "What about this one? Can you do this challenge?" And that's really, what I aim for. So really, really positive in that sense of just allowing me to interact with players who are passionate about the game all over the country and all over the world, and see what types of training are going on other places that maybe I haven't thought of, and also be able to share the ideas and things I've seen over the years with other people.
I love the your passion really comes across for the coaching and the things you do. So that's always good, because I coach at I say coach, I suppose manager is a better word, but we have over here, you probably had the term Sunday League in the UK, and I have a team of sort of, they call themselves adults. It varies as to when they are adult, but we sort of play on a Sunday morning here in the UK, and it's so interesting trying to manage, I find, the personalities as well as the actual ability ranges. You've really got to sort of find the person to know what their limitations are as much as anything else, because some people just don't take on certain instructions in a certain way, and it's really interesting to hear you speak about that. And I might have had a look at some of your drills and written some down. So thanks for that.
Glad to hear that.
Let's ask you a little bit about the men's game. I think I'm right in saying that you're a supporter of Barca and Juve, or you sort of follow their style and their games at times. Do you tend to watch the men's game from home? Is there other teams that you follow as well as those two? And do you favour any other teams that I haven't noted there?
Yeah, so I love watching the game. I'll be very honest. I'm not a good supporter of teams. I really do. I love watching Barca, and I love their style of play. am I a diehard supporter of the club if one day they played a really ugly brand of soccer, football? Probably not, no. And I'm very honest with that. So, people always mess with me. They're saying, oh, who are you supporting today? Well, yeah, I support Juventus as well. I will say that I started my support of Juventus when they were not doing as well. So I do feel proud of that one. My boyfriend is a diehard Juventus fan, but I'm not anywhere near the level of diehard support on any of these clubs. Basically, I enjoy watching the game being played well, and that doesn't necessarily mean one certain style. Like Barca has a certain style. Obviously, they like to knock the ball around a lot with lots of small passes. It doesn't have to be that. I think there's a lot of beautiful ways you can play the game, and the game interests me, and I love watching good matchups. So I would say, yeah, I would, if I had to name two teams, those are my teams, but it would be phony of me to claim that I was a diehard supporter of either of them or any team.
That's very
fair.
honest. I like that. With your boyfriend, where did his love for Juventus come in then? Did he has he got an affinity to Italy itself, or was it just a team that he picked to follow?
No, I think, when he was growing up, it was very hard to watch games, and he was a young soccer player in North Carolina, and I think one time somehow got a hold of a Juve game. I don't know if it was probably on VHS at that point or something. And he was also a big fan of Edgar Davids. So when he played for Juve, I think the combination of him seeing that game and having access to it at an early age, and just a personal, supporter of Davids. I think those two things kind of attracted him to Juventus, and then he loved the way they play. So it's definitely grown since then to the point where, if they don't do well in a day, I know we're gonna have a bad day in the household. So that's part of my support for the team, because I'm like, please let it be okay that we can talk later on today.
I noticed that he's managed to get you in Juve shirts on your Instagram,
Yes.
so he's obviously doing a good job. I'll pass back to Drew, who wants to ask you a little bit about your sort of work that you do aside from the game on a journalistic standpoint.
Sure. Well, as you may have guessed, Kris and I we do a bit of writing and a bit of podcasting. Um, so, what got you into wanting to spread your love and knowledge of the game through the written word? You I don't know if you still write for the blog that you had for the New York Times, but you did do that for a while. You also have you've done some stuff for the Our Game magazine. You have a blog on your website. So, what got you into that? Because writing is not for everybody. Especially some people like to sort of leave their passion for sport or anything else to themselves as maybe like a private thing. But you've been so open with sharing it in a number of ways with people. So why that avenue?
Yeah, I think actually writing was probably the first avenue in which I started to share some of my thoughts and ideas on the game and my personal experiences. My mom is an author, or was an author, and still is in the writing world. Always been a writer. So as a young kid growing up, I was always exposed to writing as a really wonderful way to express yourself. I was pretty nerdy in the fact that I kept tons of journals, and it wasn't like long, like Dear Diary type journals. I would write down some funny things, and now I look back, it's hilarious. But I would write down little lists of things or things that I thought would be funny to read later on in life, and they definitely are fun. Because I have, just for example, I wrote some things when I was really nervous for a tryout or something like that. That was an important moment in my mind at the time that I knew. I had this feeling that if I look back on it later, it seems so ridiculous, which it did. But I also have some funny like lists of players who I wanted to train to become better than, and I crossed them off my list as I felt like I passed them by. So that was kind of the beginning of my writing, is keeping those journals. And then that kind of moved into, I was asked to write a blog for the New York Times Online when I traveled to a big tournament at the Algarve Cup in Portugal with the national team. So I kind of documented my experiences there, and they asked me to continue to write if I wanted to. So it was a very informal relationship with the New York Times Online. That has kind of changed over the years, and now it's a little bit harder because they've changed the format of their online content with soccer. They write more articles now and less of the blogging experience. So I've still gotten a couple things published through them, but really, I write for Our Game magazine, like you said, and I've continued my blog, but posted it on my personal website instead, because that way I can be a little more free to share my thoughts and ideas, and not have to put it in a format that someone else is looking for all the time, although I'm open to doing that as well. But I just think, I tell people this, I often learn more about myself from my writing than I think anyone else learns from it. So it's partly for me, and I figure why not share it with everyone else, if it's shareable to the public.
It's a good way, as you say, it's a good way to. Sometimes I find I'm very much not the writer. Drew's far more talented in the writing department than I am. I'm still learning, but I often find it's quite fun just to you have lots of thoughts and you just think I just want to share this with somebody, and if 3 or 4 people pick up on it and and read it, you think, oh, at least I've got my views across. There's nothing worse than having to hold stuff in. So I'm totally with you on that. Totally
Exactly.
with you.
Yeah, for sure.
Let's talk about sort of women in sport in general. Tell us a bit about your experiences from a youth to an adult, and also can you sort of shed some insight in overcoming? Have you had any obstacles or specific figures that inspired you to carry on when you had those days where you just thought, "Is this for me?"
Yeah, well, I think I would say I'm very fortunate as a female growing up, one in the US, which is very supportive of women's sports, and also the area, like I said, North Jersey area, grew up a lot around a lot of strong female role models, whether it was, my mom herself, who's an athlete, always been a runner. She swims, she goes to the gym every day. So always surrounded by, an athletic female role model. And then also just whether it was, the moms of kids in my class or the people I grew up around were all really, you know, women who empowered me to think, whatever I wanted to do, if I set a goal and I went about it in a logical way and worked really hard, that I could achieve whatever I wanted to do. So that was kind of always my mindset as a young female, and very soon into my life, a young female athlete. Um, I guess, yeah, absolutely. I would say I've faced obstacles all the time, and everyone, I think, who cares deeply about what they do and is going after a goal, a lofty goal, is going to face those obstacles. I've been fortunate, health wise, to have not had any major injuries, knock on wood. But I do a lot to take care of my body, and I've tried to minimize the potential risk of any of those things. I think, though, for me, some people will look at, I'm a professional player, I've played with the national team, all those things, but I've had a lot of times where I was either cut from teams, I was on the bench, coming off the bench at the end of games, or sometimes not even playing at all. I've been a reserve player, nearly as much in my career as I've been a starter. And so for me, I feel that I'm constantly having to prove myself and prove my worth as a player. And it's a goal of mine always to be that 90-minute player on a team that's really needed. And I think that's something that's, to this point in my career, kind of been a little bit hit or miss. And I realize that there's a lot that I can do to control that, and also some a little bit out of my control. So I'd say along the way, there have certainly been obstacles. There have been coaches who told me, oh, you're not athletic enough to play at the highest level. And or told me, you're cut from the team. I was cut from the national team several times, and then proved myself enough to be brought back into camp. So for me, it's been a very up and down in terms of little successes and failures along the way. But I think what's impacted me a lot, and the mindset I try to maintain, although it's much easier said than done, is kind of that feeling of just go for constant improvement. If you're always getting better, good things will come. It's the moment that you stop focusing on what you can do to get better and start focusing on all those things that are out of your control, that I think those become obstacles. So for me, as long as I am improving as a player, I feel good about things. But yeah, it's definitely not been a smooth road by any means. I've been told no a lot of times. I've been cut a lot of times, but just always focusing on continually getting better, and proving any of those people wrong, basically.
All right, it's before we move on to the next question, I actually have I guess a sidebar question for that. Would you, based off of your personality, that how you observe yourself and your experiences through the game, or do you think you're the type of person that would rather have had those obstacles and people have told you like, no, you're not good enough, or whatever? Would you prefer things to come easily for you? Because some people
Um,
might be a little bit different,
yeah, no, that's a good question. I would say no. I'm very thankful, because I think that, if I look at where I am in my career right now, am I satisfied? No, not at all. But if I were to look at, and say as a young player, if I were to able to watch, video footage of me now when I was 9 and just starting out with this dream and goal, I think I've surpassed what I ever imagined of myself as a player. If you take out any of the outside factors of am I a starter here, am I on the national team, any of those things, I just think my capabilities as a player, I've been pushed to achieve things and be able to do things on the field, in the gym, just in a lot of ways as an athlete that I never would have imagined as a young player. So no, I definitely, I think those obstacles were necessary in terms of continuing to push me to achieve things I didn't even think I could. Would I love to have a slightly smoother road and be a starter? Yeah, I wouldn't say I would turn that opportunity down. I think, to be very honest, if I'm going to answer that completely honestly, I think the older I get in my career, the more I would potentially say that I'd rather have fewer obstacles. I think as a young player, they were very useful to me. At this point, I could do with fewer obstacles and a smooth path.
I think that's completely fair on a number of levels. I guess moving through that, as you mentioned that you're 29 now. A lot of people expect ballers or soccer players to maybe play at a certain standard up until a certain age, early to mid 30s at the most. So moving with that, when you're done with active participation playing, when you retire, hang the boots up, where do you see yourself career wise? Would you like to continue with coaching, writing, and being involved, or someone like maybe Gabriel Batistuta, would you rather just completely wash your hands of the sport entirely? Where do you see yourself?
No, I definitely want to stay involved in the sport. I'm working on, actually, I'm hoping that my transition from playing to after playing transition smoothly. I'm working on a lot of things that I want to continue and just continue to grow at the time in which I decide to step off the field, which I never will think I'll do in full. I think I'll kind of be not playing professionally, but I'll always be playing for fun. So I definitely will never leave the game. It depends on, the capacity in which I'm involved will be dependent on a lot of things, I think, but I definitely am interested in continuing, maybe not as a coach, coaching teams per se, but I definitely would like to look at the development system and maybe do some things organizationally with that. Potentially to continue to work in the women's league in an organizational sense. Um, I definitely would like to continue to work with youth players on the technical side of the game. I'm working on some areas in which technology can help me to do that. So potentially some type of online training system, maybe in the form of an app. So these are all things that are kind of things I'm already thinking of doing, but I would want to have kind of in the works at the point in which I'm done playing on the field, so that it can be a smooth transition. But definitely not leaving the game. I would say it's still slightly unclear where exactly it will take me, but I'm very open to continuing to influence the game in positive ways in any way I'm able to without actually being a player on the field, even though I'll be jealous of people still playing at that point.
It's really good to hear that, actually, because as you say, you do hear a lot of players that more and more as time goes on that sort of say, football is a job or soccer's a job, and then I'm done, and it's like I always find that's a shame, because particularly speaking from the UK point of view, there's not enough people who speak as well about the game, even as yourself or sort of anybody else that may not come into our audience bracket. There's so many pundits over here that you just think, I wish you had left the game behind, because they don't have to talk some rubbish. But I'm sure you get them in the States as well, so it's tough. Before I ask you our final question that I ask all of our listeners, I've got another sidebar question for you, just off the bat. You're a fan of the Nike boots. I've got to ask you, Hypervenoms or Tiempos?
So I always go with Tiempos. I'm really not flashy when it comes to that stuff. I've had to compromise my non-flashiness a little for Nike because, obviously they're making all these cool colors and different models, but I like the more standard thing. I would say Tiempos definitely fall in the more, a little more regular.
I like that answer, definitely. I'm one of those players that would wear the flashy boots but could never really back it up, so never mind. Right, our final question then. We asked this to all of our guests, and it might take a bit of kind of explaining, but are you familiar with the term hipster?
Yes, I am familiar. I know
You
where
know
this
this
is
is going.
going.
Good, right,
Yeah.
brilliant. Then I shall ask you, have you got a favourite hipster player, past or present? We always break the rules and we always say you can have two, so you can actually have one from the past and the present. And to throw an even bigger curveball, it can be from the men's game and the women's game. You can have a couple of answers.
Okay, well, yeah, this one was one, I'm prepared for this, but I did have to think very deeply about this because I know in the past I've had those players that I really liked that people are kind of like, really? That's your favorite player or something? But I was struggling to think of them, when I was thinking about this earlier. But I would say I don't know how hipster we're going to go here, but I really like Marek Hamsik on Napoli. I'm gonna get in trouble for this one because it's a Juventus rival, but I he's one of my favorites. I always enjoy watching him play. I don't know if he technically does he count as a
Oh,
hipster
God, yeah.
player?
Actually, I think he does. I don't think enough
No.
people talk about him.
And he's
how
got a
good he is.
mohawk and tattoos, so
Okay,
he's definitely hipster. So.
He does.
Yeah, like really hipster, right? um, and I don't know. This is a little bit of this might not be so hipster because I feel like anyone who plays for PSG already can't be hipster because they just have such a stacked team. But Nate is one of my favorite players also. He's not really talked about that much, so I feel like he could be hipster too. I don't know.
Good answers. Do you have any, maybe sort of veering the question slightly to the side, but in the current women's game, is there anybody that you look at and sort of have a real admiration for, or someone that you sort of just look at and think that's a real standout player in the game right now in the women's game?
Yeah, I think it's hard because anyone on the U.S. national team, I feel like this point can't really be called a hipster player because they've gotten so much positive media attention. But and yeah, I would say this is outside the range of the hipster for sure. But Becky Sauerbrunn to me is pure class. Just such a smart, talented player. I know she technically isn't a hipster player, but I have to call her out. It would be wrong to say anyone else. I think on the U.S. national team at this point, for me personally, I think Becky. Just I have so much respect for her. I would say this is one who maybe not that many people have heard of. Nadia Nadim, who played for Sky Blue FC in New Jersey. A Danish player, forward, really quality player. I think she doesn't, obviously Denmark is kind of an up and coming team in the women's game. So she hasn't got, that much publicity on that front and kind of recently started playing in the US and just always a quality player. Every time I've played against her or, had the opportunity to watch her play, I've been very impressed. Quality movement, good athlete, and also just really classy finisher as well. So I would say she'd be my hipster player on the women's side.
That's a good answer, and we will of course do our research, and we'll give them a follow for you. So
yes.
We'll absolutely do
Okay.
that. Anything else from yourself, Drew? Before I give Yael an opportunity to promote anything that she's doing currently.
No, I think I'm all right.
Good. No worries, no worries. So, Yael, the floor is yours. Anything that you would like to promote, feel free to let our listeners know where they can follow you on the various social medias that we all live our days in, and anything, as I say, that is upcoming or that you're currently working on that you want to mention.
And also, real quick, if you have any questions,
Absolutely,
for us,
yeah.
that's also
Absolutely.
acceptable.
Oh, yeah, okay. I wasn't prepared to think of those, but I don't think you think it. No, I appreciate that. First of all, I appreciate the conversation about the women's game. I think, anytime people are talking about the women's game, analyzing, it's so positive. We need people being critical of the women's game, knowing the players, talking about it philosophically, all those things. So I really appreciate the conversation, the opportunity to share some of my thoughts. I would say, I'm constantly putting out content on all the avenues of social media. The big thing I'm really trying to grow is the video content. So if anybody ever goes on YouTube, my YouTube channel is called Y Football. So like the letter Y, like the first letter of my name, then FUTBOL. If people want to subscribe, that's awesome. I'm also working to potentially start to unfold some actual training sessions that will be available, maybe like a weekly technical session for players. So if you check out my website, yaelaverbuch.com, that will all be on there eventually. So I'd say those two things, be on the lookout. I'm always working to make easier ways for people to achieve their goals and work with the ball. So that's really my main aim. But yeah, just thank you to you guys for the opportunity and the platform to talk about the women's game.
Absolute pleasure, and I have to say thank you to Drew because Drew certainly did the kind of the hard work in getting your free time. So I really appreciate Drew for doing that. Thank you very much, Drew.
appreciate you too, pal.
God bless you. God bless you. But yeah, very, very kind words, Yael. We really appreciate it. And obviously we're sort of in our early stages, I think it's fair to say, but we think it's important that we get all walks of life, football-wise, sort of men's, women's, business, whatever it is, kind of out there. And it's been an absolute pleasure to speak to you. So we thank you very much for your time this evening.
All right, I appreciate it a lot. So keep doing what you're doing. I'll be following.
Thank you very much. We appreciate that. And all that is left to be said is those immortal words of our website. That is, keep your beard strong and your glasses trendy, unless you're a lady, because ladies with beards doesn't really work in 2016, I'm afraid. But thank you so much for listening. Follow us at the FH Podcast, and we will speak to you very soon.